What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Best Show Ever Pod, the podcast where I interview people about the best concert they ever saw in their life. I'm your host, Cam Hertz, and this is a really cool episode. This is got a musician on this episode, someone who has been playing some really cool shows recently and through the summer. But turns out he's actually seen some really cool shows too. It's Brian Murray from Dogs in the Pile. Um, we talked to him while he's in his studio out on the East Coast. We get into some really cool stuff. We get into Phish. We get into just some classic dad and son concert going stuff. Um, and he's a really cool dude. It's a really great conversation. So I won't bore you with any more intro. Sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation that I had with Brian from Dogs in a Pile. But first, here's a little bit of music from none other than Jesus and Fartfinger.
This is the best show ever. This is the best show ever. This is the best show ever. This is the best show.
Best show I ever heard.
I think I have to agree.
Yeah.
And we can actually officially get this started.
All right.
There's going to be for those of you listening to this episode, we started it twice. So there's actually two alternate takes of this, and you'll never get to hear that. Those are going to be in the vault forever. You'll miss out on it completely. But this is the official interview with with Brian Murray, not Jeremy Kaplan from Dogs.
Is that what it's
in
showing?
the corner of your video? It says Jeremy. But let's not get that confused either. We're talking to Brian. And happy to have you, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really cool.
Yeah. So you guys wrapped up a pretty hot summer. Like I was saying before, I got to see one of those shows at the Mint, so that was super fun. But what are you guys doing now that you're waiting for another tour to start?
Well, we're mostly playing on the weekends this month of August. Since Peach at the beginning of July, we went from being on the road all the time, like never coming home, to playing more sporadically and more local for the most part. So it's been good. Just been doing a lot of work at home, writing music, rehearsing, working on all sorts of stuff, merchandise, and it's been great. Feel really inspired from, the month of July was just, there was so much going on, and so many great, once we got home, so many great bands came through town. Goose and Tab played in the same 4 days at the Stone Pony, and that was freaking awesome. And yeah, so it's cool. Just, taking it slower with the shows, playing on the weekends, but still working, still seeing each other. So
it's got to be nice to have like weekend gig dates, and it's still work. You guys are still out there working, but it's got to be nice to, like, you're in the studio and you're working on stuff, but then you get to go like kind of cut loose and be on stage and like play in front of a crowd and get a response and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet. And you've got the perfect like musician backdrop right now. For those of you watching the video or not watching the video, Brian's got he looks like he's about to drop a master class on us right now about recording.
Yeah.
He's got all the stuff. He's got all the stuff there.
Yeah. Got the 3 sides to the keys now. If you can.
That's right.
Oh, can't really see it, but yeah.
Yeah. You got all the boards there.
Yeah.
It's looking great. And it's awesome to get to see you guys play live. It's awesome to watch you guys' dynamic together on stage. Like, pretty apparent. Like, I hadn't seen you guys before that Mint show, and had been listening and following along. But getting to see you guys live was such a treat. But we're not here to talk about any of the shows that you've played live.
Nope.
Even though you've done some cool ones, we're here to talk about the shows that Brian has seen. So before we get into your best shows and your honorable mentions and all that stuff, I like to do first show and worst show. So what was the first concert you ever saw in your life?
First concert I ever saw was Motley Crue at Madison Square Garden, 2009.
Dude.
I was 10. And yeah, my dad's friend invited us to go with him and his kid, my friend Matt. And yeah, it was my first time seeing a show, period. And it was at Madison Square Garden, which is really cool. First place to see a show and just be like, wow, what the heck is going on here? The room, I remember like the first image I had in my head of that place.
Yeah.
Just, you know, like I was just shocked that we could go right from the train just into this amazing place in like 2 seconds, right in the middle of New York City. And I grew up in Long Island, so most of the shows I've seen are at Madison Square Garden. I've probably seen like 50 at least concerts there, and a couple games and stuff, you know, Knicks and whatever else. But yeah, so saw the show. It was like a big shock. It was really rowdy and the crowd was really intense, but it was cool. And I was just kind of watching in amazement the whole time how a rock show was, people losing their minds, screaming, cheering, and the band having a blast on stage. Tommy Lee and Mick Mars, right? Yeah, and the other guys. Mickey Stick.
I got to be honest, I don't know the members of Motley Crue off the top of my head, so you got to know Tommy Lee, but I don't.
Yeah, Nikki Sixx, Mick Mars, and is it Vince Neil? Is that the guy? I think that's the whole band. I don't know.
Listen, I believe you. I'll tell you that much. I believe that that's it. But yeah, dude, I mean, like, what for a 10-year-old, like Motley Crue is such a rock and roll show, you know? Like what was that environment like? That kind of like freak you out, or was that like exciting, or was it like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life type vibes? Or
it was definitely a shock. I don't think at that point I was like yeah, I knew I wanted to be a musician, but having that really be a thought didn't come until a little later.
Yeah.
From another, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about those shows later. But
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was inspiring, and I had started to play guitar a couple of years before that when I was like 7, and was learning Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Rush and stuff like that. Those were my first couple of bands. And Motley Crue was heavier. I didn't really listen to them before seeing the show, but I did like a lot of the songs, and it was fun.
I was big on the same thing. I was listening to all my dad's music. You know, Zeppelin and Floyd and Rush were like his, you know, his pillars of music tastes. But my first show was Queen, which is like a similar, like, it's just like a rock show, and they, you know, like,
yeah, wow,
yeah, just like blew my freaking mind.
Yeah.
I'll say this, at my Queen show, I was like, I'm gonna be a front lead guitarist. That's what I'm gonna be. And then later that week, I think I might have gone to a Bucks game, and I was like, I'm gonna be a point guard in the NBA. So I was like deciding my shit all the time. I was a new, you know, went home and watched the Masters, and I'm like, I'm gonna be Tiger. So I was gonna be Tiger Woods, point guard, lead guitarist of the biggest band in the world. And so, yeah, that was my path for sure. And now I'm running a podcast, so it ended up working out. Ended up being pretty much the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's great. And then you get the golf thing with Long Strange Putt.
That's right.
Yeah.
Me and Putt have the golf thing, and we haven't got a chance to play together yet, but yeah, and like, you know, the groupies are the same for podcasts as they are for like a rock band. Like, it's crazy over here for me, so I totally get it. Completely same atmosphere. But what about what about the worst show you ever saw? And you know, I said this to Jeff, and you know, you don't have to put down any other musicians or any other artists if you don't want to. But was there like an uninspired worst show that you saw?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I realized I guess I'm lucky to have not seen so many terrible shows, but I can think of one. It was in New York City. I forget what year. I was in high school, and I used to just go online and see who was playing in New York City any given weekend. And if I was free, and I'd go with friends to see shows, and just pick this random punk band who I'm not going to name. And I was at the PlayStation Theater, which is a great venue. I love that place. Not around anymore. I don't know if they're opening up under a name or whatever, but saw the band, and it just, I don't know, it wasn't just that band. It was the two opening bands before them too. Just felt uninspired. The crowd was kind of weak, and that doesn't necessarily mean it makes for a bad show, but the crowd wasn't really having it either, and the singing didn't really stand out or any melody, and it just didn't seem like they were having fun on stage. But that was really it. There was nothing like terribly wrong about it. Just for me, the energy from the artists themselves wasn't there. And, if they're not psyched about it, then what's the point,
It's a pretty clear thing. Like, even if you don't do comedy and you go see a comedian and you see a comedian's like not having fun or like uninspired, like right away. Or if you see, if you yourself are not a musician and you go see an artist, like you may not know the notes that they're playing, you may not know, the arrangement of the, song, but you can tell if someone is feeling uninspired or looking uninspired. And so that's like a palpable thing. And honestly, you could have shit songs or shit jokes or shit whatever you're presenting, but if you're like having fun, then people are like, yeah, I'm down for this. I don't know what it is, but
yeah
and like I do like a lot of the stuff that I do is improv, and that's a bunch of fucking nonsense. It's a bunch of like it's not written jokes. It's a lot of like inside jokes and stuff. But if you are having fun, it's infectious. And so the same is true for the opposite.
Sure.
Is there like, do you guys ever feel like in dogs, is there ever anything that like, I mean, at this point, you're going to do a dogs set. You're going to show up and you're going to do a dogs in a pile set. But is there ever stuff that like helps you guys get into the mood or like hurts you guys getting into a performing mood or?
Yeah. Well, most shows we kind of get side stage and we'll do like a hands-in thing and say something different every time, like something funny or something that is in the context of the city or some crazy person who's around or something. I don't know. It's like,
right.
That'll get us pumped. We'll also like do some breathing exercises or something like that. And there are vocal warm-ups that happen too. And usually in those like 20 minutes before showtime, you can hear the crowd outside, or you got a bunch of friends there or whatever. And you just get that showtime mode. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's having a crowd there, and it feels like it should be enough. Having your buddies in the crowd feels like it should be enough. But yeah, sometimes you just got to do some extra stuff, and you got to do things to keep things light, and get yourself in the mood. I'm also way into the breathing technique thing. I've gotten into that for comedy stuff, and
right.
It used to feel like I need to be like kind of frantic. I kind of need to be like in a state of like, I don't know what's going to happen to get out there, but it's a little more consistent if I'm like calm, meditated beforehand, did something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting though. Sometimes if you go out there gung ho and you're as prepared as you can possibly be, it might not go that great. But then there are other times where you had a not ideal day leading up to it, and it ends up being like a great show where you just feel super comfortable and things are just flowing. So it's interesting. You never know where you're going to get, I guess.
Yeah. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice knowing that it's out of your hands, like anything could happen.
I guess.
It's like, yeah, I'm sure you'd like to be in control of it sometimes, but Well, sweet dude. I mean, like, you know, it's hard to pick a best show that you ever saw. It sounds like getting into New York and seeing a bunch of different variety of shows, like stuff at MSG, stuff at smaller clubs. Like, you've seen a lot of shows, so it's hard to pick a best show ever. Do you have like honorable mention shows um, that you'd be remiss if you didn't bring up?
Yeah, it's tough because my best show ever is like tied between 3 different shows. So
Yeah.
I guess they're like all honorable mentions, but yeah, so honorable mentions, saw Rush at the Garden too. That was crazy with my dad. A lot of the first shows I ever saw were with my dad. And which is great. We had a lot of fun. And yeah, who else? I've seen Phish quite a bit at the Garden too. Seen them more there than any other place, and that's just my favorite thing. My first show was actually at Jones Beach. That's an honorable mention. On July 12th, 2013, I had heard Stash on my dad's iTunes. He was given a CD like a decade earlier by some friend, friend that he would ski with, and he never really, he knew a couple of songs. It was like on his iTunes there was like Gumbo, Heavy Things, Fast Enough for You, Bouncing Around the Room, Stash. And I heard Stash first, and that's how I would find new music. I would like go through my dad's thousands of songs or whatever, and heard that, caught my ear immediately. Just that guitar tone, and it was so interesting. And started learning it immediately on guitar. I was like 12. And then a few months later, after learning a bunch of Phish's repertoire and not just listening, but guitar as well, asked my dad if he could take me to a show. And he's like, "Oh, Phish?" He's like, "Sure." I guess so. And he wasn't like a huge fan yet. And then we went to Jones Beach, and I felt it like the second they came on stage and just the crowd erupted, lights went down. It was a really cool feeling. And then they opened up with Chalk Dust Torture, and it just felt so. From the first note, I was like, "This is a cool thing to be doing,"
Yeah,
I was like,
dude.
I'd probably be wanting to. I don't know. I kind of knew in my head, I was like, "This is what I have to do: perform on stage, playing music for people that are, psyched as much as you are about music in some form."
Oh yeah.
So yeah, and then some other honorable mention Phish shows. I guess there's like my third show a couple months after that at Madison Square Garden. It was December 30th. That was the loudest crowd I ever heard in my life that night during like Super Bowl and Harry Hood and stuff and Tweezer Reprise. It was the loudest, craziest energy at the Garden I ever heard. If you listen to the audience recordings on like re-listen or something, like 3 minutes into Simple or something like that, it doesn't really do it justice, but you can kind of hear it. The crowd overtakes the band for like a second. And I was just like, wow, it was so cool. So inspiring. And yeah, and that's a special place to see them too. So seeing them there for the first time was really something. And yeah, what else was I going to say about that?
Did you, when you saw Phish, were you into like the improvised jam type of music? Because Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd is a little bit of that, but it's still pretty heavily composed. Like, once you saw Phish, did you start seeking out some more jam type music? Or
yeah, it was interesting because the Dead and Phish are always in this kind of like the same conversation a lot of the time. So I got into the Dead after Phish, which was interesting. I always knew Touch of Grey and Truckin' and Casey Jones and stuff like that from the radio, but then people were like, yeah, I mean, the Dead are similar in that they do long improvised jam sections and stuff like that. Like, go check it out. And then I started getting into that about it, a year later after checking out Phish, and I was like, oh yeah, that's also pretty great. And yeah, so and then from there, I was like officially in the jam band thing. Then I like really got into Mo, and
Yeah.
Whittle was coming up right at that time. They were getting really hot in like 2014, and saw my first Twiddle show in 2016. I think they're great. And some other bands. The Jaunty was coming up as well, and I just and a bunch of other bands. So yeah, I was getting into that whole scene, and then from there, the bands that those bands cover and artists, like the amount of artists I didn't know about that I'm a huge fan of now before Phish is crazy. Like Phish, I think that's the same for a lot of fans. They introduce you to so many bands, and different solo artists and stuff like that. It's really cool. It's like a great gateway to so much other music. And and then around the same time, I was getting into fingerstyle guitar stuff, like country fingerstyle guitar. And one more thing I want to say about that Phish show.
Yeah.
Shows at that time, I haven't seen it as much in the last couple of years since they came back from the pandemic, but at the Garden, on the way in, but mostly on the way out, people were still screaming in waves in the hallways after those shows. Like, and you're like, oh my God, still just in every hallway. I've been, practically in all the sections at MSG. Walking out in those years between like 2013, 2017, it was so loud and so just like, you were like, gasping for, it was just like such a special thing.
Yeah.
And that it was a really cool time to be seeing them, and super grateful for the experience. Yeah. And then
seeing those types of shows kind of ruins other types of shows for you, because people are so locked in. And same thing, first couple times I saw Phish, like you leave the building and people are just hooting and hollering like they just won the Super Bowl or something.
Yeah.
And there's like another night, tomorrow and everything. And then you'll go see, a band that's not in that world, or an artist that's not in that world, and people are kind of just shuffling out like how people normally do. And you're like,
too. Yeah, I felt that. And I thought about that recently. I've seen a bunch of great music lately, and it's like, man, where is that energy?
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. It's like something in the air,
Yeah, and it's like it happens on special nights, and it happens with special fan bases, and like to get to a point where you're screaming in joy after a show, a lot of stuff has to go right. Like you got to be in a good section, you got to be like having a good time on whatever drugs you're on, you got to be, like a lot of things have to converge for that. And it seems like when Phish plays Madison Square Garden, almost every category of that gets taken care of for people. They're like in a historic venue. They just saw Phish put on one of their better shows of the year. They're New York, like, it's like a whole confluence of things,
Capitol Theater has a similar energy, in my opinion. Seen a lot of great shows there too. And another honorable mention, Bela Fleck and the Flecktones at the Capitol Theater, whatever year that was. That was freaking incredible.
Wow.
One of a kind band, just wildly talented and tight and inspiring. But yeah, I was gonna say I was getting into fingerstyle guitar because I went to this is one of the greatest shows I ever seen too. I was at a camp at Berklee College of Music, and when I was in high school, it was a summer camp. It was like a 5-day program in Boston, and I went and was taking a bunch of workshops and classes and stuff, and it was really cool, meeting a lot of people, and kind of getting out of New York really for the first time to do something by myself. And it was great. And then this one teacher was like, I'm giving you all these ticket stubs to go see this Australian guitar player tomorrow. He'll flip your guitar world upside down. I was like, okay. And I took the ticket. It was Tommy Emmanuel. And I ended up going the next night at the Berklee Performance Center, the BPC. And that guy came out on stage with just his guitar, acoustic guitar, and the best acoustic sound quality in the world. Like, I've never heard anything like it. He came out and was just the most entertaining, exciting guitar player I'd ever seen, or just performer in general I'd ever seen in my life. And and it was funny because I was at a point in time in my guitar playing where I would use a flat pick, but I always used it wrong from the beginning. I like held it with 3 fingers, couldn't figure out why I like couldn't really play that fast. And then I started just using my fingers for like a year leading up to that. And he was using a thumb pick and tearing it up and making it the most interesting thing I'd ever heard. And I was like, dang, this is the way. So he was selling them at his merch table, selling thumb picks. And I bought one. And ever since that day, I've never really seriously tried to use a flat pick ever again. I just use a thumb pick now. And
Very cool.
it allows you to play very diverse. You can hold it like a flat pick by just closing your index finger on it, but you can play bass, rhythm, and melody at the same time by just like separating your fingers up and doing like banjo roll kind of styles and stuff. And that concert really changed my life forever. And I've seen him probably a dozen times since then. And every single time he delivers. He's the most animate person about practicing you'll ever listen to. Like when you hear him talk in interviews, they're like, how do you practice? Like, and he's like, oh, I was practicing at 5 a.m. this morning, every day. He's just a monster, and his hands are just the strongest, most broken in hands that I've ever seen or heard. So yeah, that concert knocked me out. And then I think it was in the same weekend I saw a Jerry Reed and Chet Atkins ensemble, which is in the same wheelhouse as Tommy Emmanuel. Those are the guys that inspired him, those cats. And saw that concert in the same room in that same weekend. And that really inspired me to go to Berkeley as well, seeing that band play, because it's like, what? They have a Jerry Reed Chet Atkins ensemble playing the music similar to the guy I just saw like 2 nights ago. This is great. And it's by Rick Peckham, who Jeremy and Sam from Dogs and I actually ended up doing a directed study ensemble class with him, where we just played like music that we were writing at the time before Dogs. And he was a great teacher and really walked us through a lot of stuff and made us a better band. But yeah, so those 2 shows were really something.
There's something to doing whatever your craft is all the time, and working and practicing and playing shows and getting up. Those reps are super important, and practicing is obviously super important, and that's a way to hone your voice. But it's just as important to go see shows. I mean, when I was in school for comedy stuff at Second City, they're like, I at the end of class would like plug my shows all the time. No one else in my class was like really doing any spots yet. And I'd be like, oh, I'm at this room at 8 tonight, or I'm at this room at 10. And I had a teacher be like, kind of like pull me aside and be like, that's great and everything that you're like doing shows and getting up, and that's nice. But like, you got to go see people, and you got to go watch people who are incredible, and you'll grow just as much or more than by just like, spinning your wheels on stage. And same thing. It's like the best advice I ever got in my creative life was to go watch people, or
For sure.
like if you're a chef, you got to go eat great food, or, if you're an artist, go see great paintings, like
Absolutely.
that's where some massive growth can happen. And you can really like knock down a lot of your limitations. I'm sure like before that show, if someone like handed you that pick, you'd be like, I don't really fucking care about this. Like, I'm good. But to watch it in practice and see the possibilities, you got to be able to see it, to be able to do it. And so, yeah, that sounds like a big weekend for you, dude.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of great songwriters too say that you're never going to really write anything that great unless you listen to a lot of great songs and songwriters, to hear all the different ways it could be done, I guess, yeah, those were really great shows.
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like so much of the artistic journey is getting out of your own way, and I think an easy way to do that is just like completely remove yourself and just listen to someone, or
Yeah,
study someone else, and remove yourself from it. Man, very sick. Are those are those all of the honorable mentions, or did the best show ever come up within those honorable mentions, or?
Yeah, it's like the best show I think I ever saw is like right up there with the Tommy Emmanuel and some other Phish show, maybe like Jam Night of the Baker's Dozen or something.
Yeah.
You know, that was the summer I graduated high school and saw like 12 of those shows. That was amazing. And before going to college, going to school in Boston. But I think, yeah, the best show. It was Roger Waters' The Wall.
Oh, dude.
2010 at Nassau Coliseum. Pink Floyd was like my biggest thing ever. I was listening to it all the time, listening to them.
Yeah.
Learning everything on guitar. I was just like such a huge fan. And yeah, my dad and I went, and it was so like just a breathtaking, like it was like a Broadway production. You know, I've seen Phantom of the Opera at Broadway. It's the same thing. The level of work and production and like just perfection of the thing is just insane. It's like overwhelming. It's intense. The theatrics and choreography and the music and the tones of every musician. Those are really serious musicians that Roger Waters hires to do that show. And obviously the music behind the wall is just brilliant. And it's funny, I gotta find this video that I have of my dad freaking out when the wall comes down at the end. He was like, yeah. He's like fucking crazy. He's like screaming, everyone's screaming. It was awesome. But yeah, so and G.E. Smith was playing guitar at that time, who's great. Yeah. He was on SNL back in the day. He's a badass, badass guy. And I don't know if you've ever listened to him talk in interviews, but he's like one of the most fun people to listen to talk about music and stories of like touring with Bob Dylan and
dude.
Yeah. He's a badass.
No, I've never heard him in interviews, but yeah, I mean, like when if Roger Waters, he's one of those guys that if he's going to put a band together, it's going to be, I mean, think of the musicians who are like inspired by Pink Floyd. I mean, everyone to some degree, has been touched by their music in some, whether through osmosis or through like deep dive devotion, is like into Pink Floyd. And so he's always going to put together a great group of musicians. And yeah, that's the describing it like a Broadway show is how I also saw that tour with my dad, who is a massive Pink Floyd fan, and my dad talks about the original Wall tour, little plug for a different episode, but yeah, I mean, he used to talk about that show like, he's seen hundreds of shows or whatever, and he's like, nothing will ever compare. And so when we got the chance to go see it, it was like, what? We're going to see the Wall? Like, how is that even going to happen? Like, yeah, just an incredible amount of work and production that goes into that show. Nuts. Was there seeing that, was that were you like, it sounds like you were really into Pink Floyd, but you like knew all the Wall songs, you like knew the show a little bit, or?
Yeah, I listened to those albums all the time, and I knew that, and I'd seen the movie, and
yep,
I knew back in the 80s they did a similar thing, I think, where they like tore the wall down, or maybe, I don't know. It probably wasn't as intense back then, although it was like the real original thing, which has got to be stupid good. But yeah, I listened to all those albums. I listened to them so much that I can't even, like, I could never listen to them now. I feel like I've tried, but it starts and then I'm just like, oh, I get too into it. It's just like so good. I'm just like, I get like mad. I'm like, how can they be so perfect? It's just like, how do you do that?
There's such a sound, and it seems like between David Gilmour and Roger Waters, there's just so much genius being put onto those records, whether it's through the arrangements of the songs or just through the sheer skill, like listening to a guy like David Gilmour. I mean, you can hear a David Gilmour solo separate with all of the other track taken off of it and be like, that's a David Gilmour solo. Like,
Yeah. And just to make a Strat sound like that, like I play a Strat, it's remarkable. And yeah, did you hear that Roger Waters' new Money single? He's remaking Dark Side of the Moon.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He just kind of like whispers spoken word over like a jazzy, quiet Money bassline progression, but it's I don't know. It's like, it's cool that he's still active and making music that he believes in. But it's funny. It's getting like a lot of hate online and stuff. But it's like, this is the guy that freaking made one of the greatest albums ever in history. It's like, let him do whatever he wants with it.
Yeah. Is there ever a time where you guys, there's songs that you guys have toured for a while now. Is there ever a time where you're like, man, I wish we could kind of go in and like, change this or add this or do a little more of this with it? Or
yeah, well, that's one of the beauties of playing in a band that plays, every show is different and you improvise a lot, is we'll play songs differently, unplanned, either by someone making his mistake and everyone has to follow until it goes into something else crazy, or just feeling something naturally in a very strange way all at the same time. Not just in the improvised parts, but in the form and the arrangement too. And but we also go back and change stuff years later too, which is cool.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if that answers her.
No, it does. It sounds like there's almost any artist would love to go back and like, address one of their albums. Like I recently saw Billy Strings and he talks about, making Turmoil on the Tinfoil, and he's like, I didn't really know what I was doing when I made that. He said this on stage. He's like, I wish I could go back and change some of those songs. And people there are like, that's my favorite shit in the world. What are you talking about? So
you know what? Yeah, the way I feel about it, like our first record was super organic and natural. And we recorded it all ourselves and in this room, actually, if you're watching this video. And if any warts or little tidbits that aren't like perfect, it's a perfect snapshot and representation of what was happening at the time in our musical growth. We were like 19 when we were recording that, and Joey was like 17 or something, and I'm super grateful that it sounds how it does, because you can hear it, like you can hear the difference now, and it's great that we have something that can musically capture that part of our lives. And yeah, I personally wouldn't want to go back and change anything, even
I mean,
stuff from the most recent album, because it's like, that's why you just keep making them to, if you didn't like something about the last one, give it another shot.
Everything's just building blocks to the next, project you're working on. It's all just nothing's the final piece, nothing's the final, like, this is it, this is dogs in the pile now. Like it's all dogs in the pile. It's all your work, and it all builds to the next one. And so going back to that show at the Wall with your dad, is your dad so my dad's gonna hate that I tell this story, but whatever. When we went to that show, we pull into the United Center in Chicago, and he hadn't been talking for a little while, and I just thought it was like because of the traffic. And he's like, all right, this is probably the last time I'm gonna see these guys. Okay. And so I brought a joint.
Oh,
I brought one, and he like pulls this little like mosquito leg like joint out of his jacket. It's like bent and broken or whatever. And he's just like, we're gonna smoke this in there. And you don't have to if you don't want to, but I want you to know that this is gonna happen. Is that like a relationship you have with your dad too, or is that
no. Like, no, never with like pot or weed. but yeah, I think at like one of the Phish shows we went to, we had like a couple beers before the show, and that was like real exciting. That was about
dude. Gotta have that, that beer. Like I'm sure the concert with your son and the beer with your son moment feels like a similar moment. Feels like
it's a bonding little
yeah, dude. I'll never forget that moment. I thought I myself had been smoking weed for a few years at that point, so I had to be like, "Oh, yeah, I guess, I don't."
Yeah,
Inside, I was like, of course I'll smoke this fucking thing with you," you know, like,
right. That's
um,
great.
um,
My dad explaining to me what pot. I didn't know what pot was at Motley Crue or I keep saying pot. Why do I keep saying pot? I didn't know what
yeah,
like
you sound like a cop, dude.
I yeah. I didn't know what it was in my first few shows, and I like knew I smelled that smell. And to me, I just called it like concert smell. It's like it smells like a
Yeah.
concert, you know? And I said that to my mom one time, and she's like, "Oh, he's probably smelling the pot and stuff." And I was like, "I guess that's why I call it pot, because my mom always called it that." And
Yeah.
yeah, and then my dad was like, "Yeah, that's what that is." And then yeah, now obviously I know what it is, and it's at all the shows. But
It's crazy. The first time I smelled that at a show, I was like, "It's weird. It smells like Uncle Eric's house here." Um,
yeah,
and my dad's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't think about that. Don't don't worry about that."
yeah,
Um, man, I mean, yeah, Pink Floyd is to me is such a like me and my dad's music. And I think about all the times like he was showing me stuff that he was like, we'd get in a long car ride and he's like, "This is gonna be weird, but this is gonna be some Pink Floyd for you." Um, and it's cool. It like I've had this moment with other people too, where we talk about the father son moment with Pink Floyd, and sometimes I think Pink Floyd gets kind of overlooked within the jam scene. So you know, talked about it with my dad. Super happy to talk about it with you, dude. So with Dogs in the Pile, you guys got shows coming up and all of that. Do you guys have? Is there anything that you're excited to see along the way? Like, are you doing any sets alongside anyone, or like anyone that you're excited to see play live?
yeah. Well, we're doing a tour with Pigeons playing ping pong at
Yeah,
the end
dude.
of the year in the fall, and that should be awesome. Those guys are so much fun and really cool people as well. And yeah, we're gonna be hitting some crazy venues around the U.S. like Mission Ballroom in Colorado.
Man.
Kind of a newer venue. It's wild. It's so cool. We saw the Disco Biscuits there when we were kind of living there for a month, doing like a residency at different venues, and
Yeah.
it's a really cool room. Really cool room. The sound is great. It's a really cool place to see a show. Really cool stage, cool building. Yeah, and then some other shows. Super excited for Great Divide. That's a thing coming up. It'll probably have already happened by the time this comes out, but it's a campground in New Jersey. That's really sweet, and there are a bunch of cabins there. Everybody stays there for like a 2-day thing, and yeah. So, yeah, and then just looking at the schedule here, those are the ones that come to mind first of all, and then yeah, I mean, you asked.
Well, I know. I mean, I'm stoked to see you guys play with Pigeons playing ping pong. I'm gonna get to catch you guys at the Troubadour, which is like um not a new place, super old place, but
Oh,
it seems like, I've gotten to see a couple other shows there and it's just such a classic like LA rock venue, so many people have played there and it's such a small, tight-knit room in there. So I'm personally very stoked for that show and glad you guys are coming through.
yeah.
That was Elton John's first U.S. show. Was that Troubadour?
Oh, really?
That's exactly right, dude. And that's exactly what I think about every time I'm in there. I'm like, oh man, Elton John.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait for that. Hell yeah.
That would have been cool to have Sam kind of in the background this whole time, kind of like giving us some like facts. He's like, just so you
Yeah,
know, Dark Side of the Moon came out in 1974. So actually, just so you guys know,
great.
that would have been cool. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that would be, yes.
that would have been awesome. Well, dude, thanks so much for doing the show. Super cool that we got to talk about your best shows. And listen, if your best show ever gets topped, if you ever see anyone where you're like, fuck, that just overtook the wall,
Yeah.
be happy to have you back on, man.
Yeah, I'll call you as I'm walking out of the venue.
shouting and screaming. Yeah.
That's something else I forgot to mention about the best show, the Roger Waters show, was that as soon as my dad and I got home from that show, we went online and got tickets for the next one at MSG. It was like,
no way.
That, like, holy crap, you know. But yeah.
You got to go see it again. I mean, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to process, and so
ended up seeing it.
Hell yeah, dude. It
was great.
Man.
That was the best show ever. That was the best show ever. That was the best show ever. That was the best show.
Man, there was some fucked up stuff in there.
Yeah, what the fuck was that about?
So that was a little bit of music from Jesus and Fartfinger, but also a really great conversation with Brian from Dogs in a Pile. I mean, just a great band. If you're getting a chance to get out and see those guys while they're on tour with Pigeons playing ping pong, go check them out. They're fantastic. Brian's fantastic, and the rest of the band is awesome. And we had a great conversation, dude. I love chatting Pink Floyd. Love talking about dad stuff. Come on, what's better than seeing a concert with your dad, dude? But if you've liked this episode, if you like this conversation, there's a bunch of other ones. It's the best show ever. Check it out. We're on Osiris Media. Got a bunch of cool conversations with a bunch of cool people, and more of them are coming out soon. So look out for those. But until then, have a great show.